Shavua Tov, anti-Semitism. It starts in this week's parsha. Yitzchak finds himself in the land of the Philistines after a famine. The land of the Philistines is quite fertile. He plants there and becomes quite wealthy, reaping 100-fold. Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, says, "You've become too wealthy for us. Go away. Beat it." And the phrase, "Atzamta mimenu," you've become too wealthy for us, some commentaries translate to mean, you became wealthy off of our backs. Get out of here. Anti-Semitism. So Yitzchak withdraws, and he then has his servants dig a well, but the Philistines come and they say, "That's our water, not yours," and they stop up that well. It repeats and happens a second time. Finally, Yitzchak gets far enough away that the Philistines leave him alone. That's at a place called Rehovot. Now, says Yitzchak, we can expand in the land. He makes his way to Beersheba, where God appears to him and repeats the promise that he will inherit the land. That should be the end of that sad story of anti-Semitism. But there's a sequel. Avimelech shows up, and Yitzchak says to him, "What are you doing here when you hate me?" And Avimelech says, "Now I see that God is with you. Let's make a peace treaty." We need to understand this. What was the source of this hatred of Yitzchak? How come Avimelech and the Philistines had loved and respected Yitzchak's father Abraham, but Yitzchak is treated with contempt? What changed? And finally, what caused Avimelech to sing a different song at the very end in that coda? Why does he at the end want to make a peace treaty? The answer relates to religion and life. And I believe it starts at the beginning of the parsha with the story of Yaakov and Esav, the twin sons of Yitzchak and Rivka, Esav being born a little bit earlier. The Torah tells us that Esav was a hunter, a man of the fields, ish sadeh. Yaakov was an innocent one who dwelt in the tents. He was a scholar. Yitzchak, the father, loved Esav, the son, kitzayed befiv, because the food that Esav hunted was delicious in the mouth of Yitzchak. And Rivka loves Yaakov. I'd like to give a parenthetic reason as to why they loved each particular child, because there was a personal affinity. Rivka was a person of tents. When Rivka first came to Yitzchak, so the Torah says Yitzchak brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, and he was comforted, and then he loved her. So Rivka is connected to tents, and therefore she feels a special affinity for her son Yaakov, who is a Yoshevo Halim, one who dwells in tents. But Yitzchak loves Esav. When Rivka first showed up, Yitzchak had gone out to the fields to say prayers, as we talked about last week. So Yitzchak has an affinity for the fields. And Esav is described as an ish sadeh, a man of the fields. So therefore Yitzchak loves Esav. However, there's a big difference between what Yitzchak was doing in the field and what Esav was doing in the field. Yitzchak was praying to Hashem. Esav was spilling blood. And the story goes that one particular day, Esav comes home from the field. He's very tired. The rabbis fill in the blanks. Why was he tired? Because he had been busy committing murder and rape. Ha! Great. Anyway, he's very tired, and he sees that Yaakov has prepared a lentil soup, and he says, "I am tired. Please give me some of that lentil soup." Maybe he didn't say it as politely. And Yaakov says to him, "Fine, just sell me your birthright." Esav goes, "I'm going to die. Of what use is the birthright?" And so he sells his birthright to Yaakov in exchange for a bowl of soup. Idiot, perhaps. The rabbis again fill in the blanks. What is behind this story? So what is behind the story is that the birthright implied the future service of God in the temple. At that point, the firstborns were to be the Kohanim, the priests. And Yaakov, according to the rabbis, explained to Esav, it's a great honor, but it's a very dangerous thing. If you're a Kohen, and you do the service incorrectly, in impurity, for example, you might be viable to get the death penalty from heaven from having transgressed. The higher you are on a ladder, the farther there is to fall. The rabbis indeed tell us that on Yom Kippur, in the times of the Second Temple, the Kohen Gadol would wear a rope tied around his waist when he would bring the ketoret, the incense, into the Holy of Holies. Why so? Well, there was an argument at that time between the Sadducees and the Pharisees as to where one was to put the incense on the coals. Did you do it outside of the Holy Holies and then go into the Holy of Holies with it already burning? Or did you go into the Holy of Holies and have it on, put it on there and let it burn there? The goal was to fill the Holy of Holies with the smoke and the aroma of the ketoret, of the incense. The argument between the Sadducees and the Pharisees, we are the descendants of the Pharisees, was where do you put the incense on the coals to start that process? So if you put it on outside, like the Sadducees say, that would be violating the Torah mitzvah according to the Pharisees, and very often the Kohen Gadol would do that and would go into the Holy of Holies and drop dead. And so they had to get him out. Nobody could go in to get him out. It's the Holy of Holies. So they had that rope to pull him out. So Yaakov explains stuff like this to Esav. And Esav says, well, I'm going to die. I can't live up to that. If I'm going to be the firstborn and I'm going to have to do that, I know I'm going to screw it up. Pardon me, and I'm going to die. So therefore, of what use to me is the birthright? And he sells the birthright to Yaakov. Okay, very good. That is already a background. But now, asks the great Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, what is so unreasonable about what Esav says? Why is Esav considered evil? Actually, it's a good concern. He's saying, I'd rather not have the risk. And so he gives an answer, first of all, that when responsibility calls, even if there's danger, you must answer the call. If you miss your responsibility in life, you've wasted your life. And that is a sin. That is evil. That is wrong. Okay. I'd like to take this a step further and see a global concept that is very important for us to understand our moral way in the world. You see, this argument of the Sadducees and the Pharisees relates to a more fundamental question. My teacher, the great Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, explained, what difference does it make if you put the incense on the fire outside of the Holy of Holies or inside of the Holy of Holies? And so Rav Aaron answered, it makes a world of difference, because the argument was not over just a technical thing. It was over a fundamental moral principle. Do we say that the ends justify the means? Do I say that it is acceptable because I have a goal of filling the Holy of Holies with fire, with smoke and beautiful aroma, but the means of putting the actual incense onto the flames can be done not in the holy way, not in the holy place? The yeshiva needs money. Do we have a right to be dishonest and maybe cheat on taxes, or be dishonest in our reporting to the government, or in our fundraising? Is that okay? Because the ends are certainly worthy, but the means therefore have to become worthy, even if otherwise they wouldn't be. This is one fundamental argument, and the Pharisees, from whom we are descended, and which is the opinion we follow, say that absolutely the means must be as holy as the ends. Just like the incense has to fill the Holy of Holies with its smoke and aroma, it must be put on the coals inside the Holy of Holies. The process must be as holy as the goal. But with Esav, I believe there's an opposite philosophy at work. The idea that the means justifies the ends. In other words, that if my goal is a bad one, but in order to get there I'm going to do only good deeds, does that work? That is Esav. The Torah tells us that Yitzchak loved Esav because the beautiful, delicious food that he hunted was in Yitzchak's mouth. But the words Tzayed Befiv are also interpreted to mean that Esav hunted his father. He fooled his father. He made his father seem that he was quite pious, quite righteous, quite religious. He asked his father, how do you take tithes from salt, for example? In other words, his goal was selfish. Esav was somebody who lived for instant gratification. But he believed that the way to get that instant gratification had to be holy. I'll make myself very religious. Something which we have in the book of Leviticus, which is called a naval bereshut haTorah, a base person with the permission of the Torah. The rabbis, there's a pasuk, a verse that says, a commandment, you shall be holy because I am holy. And the great Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachmanides, who lived 750 years ago, explains, how does one be holy? What is the Torah telling us to do? And he says the Torah is telling us to not be naval bereshut haTorah, not to be a base person with the permission of the Torah. What does that mean? The guy says, I'm allowed to eat as long as it's kosher, so my goal in life is to eat, and he eats so much that he can't walk, you have to roll him. I'm allowed to be with my wife, so therefore I'm going to spend all of my time involved with my wife. for example. In other words, his goal is to fulfill every physical lust and desire, every immediate gratification, but he does it with rabbinical supervision. The food he eats is glot kosher, the wife is his wife, it's not someone else's wife. He's following the laws according to the letter, but completely missing the goal. He's saying that the means justify the ends, and this was Esav to a T. Now, there is an interesting interpretation of this commandment of being holy, which says that it is also parallel to a commandment of V'halachta bidrachav. You shall walk in God's ways. How does one walk in God's ways? The rabbis say, what is God? Merciful? You too be merciful. What is God? He gives kindness. You too give kindness. What is God? He is honest and truthful and so forth and so on. You too. Imitatio Dei. Imitate the attributes of God. Now, I noticed that this particular verse, V'halachta bidrachav, you shall walk in God's ways, it doesn't say V'itnahagta b'midotav, that you shall act according to his character. It says you shall walk in God's ways. In other words, you shall take Kindness Avenue. You shall go down Mercy Street. You shall take Truth and Honesty Highway, and you shall park on Peace Alleyway. In other words, the means, it's a journey. We are going on a journey to achieve a goal. So we must do all of these things according to God's ways. Maybe it's Waze, W-A-Z-E, like the app. And God's ways, you put in the destination. The destination is to be together with God, to have the name of God called upon you. And the way to get there is to go down God's roads, Mercy Avenue, Kindness Street, Truth and Honesty Highway, Peace Alleyway. That will bring you. The ends and the means must both be of a holy measure. If they are not, if you say that the means justifies the ends, that you can be a selfish person seeking immediate gratification, and you use religion to achieve it, then that is evil, that is Esav. Indeed, in history we see that the descendants of Esav, some of the Roman Catholic popes of the Middle Ages, did this perfectly. They were completely pious to the outside world, but completely corrupt inside. We know it historically. They committed all three cardinal sins. Idol worship, I don't need to mention, that's already built into the system. But they also committed murder and adultery. We know about popes who had their rivals assassinated. We know about popes that had wild parties with women of the evening in the Vatican, for heaven's sake. It was tremendously corrupt. Now, I'm not saying that that's the way it is, but that's the way it was back then for a couple of people who had that approach. The ends must be as holy as the means. You need both. You can't have one without the other. You can't say the ends justify the means, and you can't even say that the means justify the ends. And if you try to have such a religion, then it becomes it arouses resentment. And I believe that this is at the core of what happened between Yitzchak and Avimelech. That Avimelech knew that God walked with Avraham, and so therefore he respected and he loved him. But he wasn't sure about Yitzchak. Yitzchak seems to be freeloading. Yitzchak is making believe he's as pious as his father, but I don't see the sign that God is with him. Maybe this is Freudian projection on Avimelech's part, because that is also a possibility, but I see him as being a phony, and that arouses resentment. How dare you claim to be the chosen people when you're really just trying to get yourselves rich? How often have we heard that song? So then what happens? Yitzchak goes away, and he leaves the fertile areas of the Philistines. There may still be residual famine in the land, and he's digging wells, and everywhere he digs a well, it's successful. So the Philistine, they come, they argue, but then he goes already to an area near Beersheba, which is an arid area to begin with. And there he is indeed successful as never before. God appears to Yitzchak. I don't know if Avimelech knew that God had appeared to Yitzchak or not, but he clearly saw that Yitzchak was walking down Kindness Avenue, taking Mercy Street, traveling on Truth and Honesty Highway and parking on the alleyway of peace. He saw that Yitzchak was walking with God and God was blessing him everywhere, whether it was fertile or not. And then Avimelech said, this person is sincere. It's not just a show. It's not like Esav. This is indeed somebody who is devoted to God, who is walking with God and has God as his goal. The Torah tells us in the book of Deuteronomy that if you want to get past anti-Semitism, the Torah tells us exactly how. You follow the commandments, you do this, you walk in the ways of God, and then Vira'u kol amei ha'aretz, all of the nations of the world will see you, Ki Shem Hashem nikra alecha, that the name of God is called upon you, v'yaru mimeka, and they will fear you. They will have awe and respect for you. So if there's anti-Semitism, perhaps we need to look at ourselves and say that it is because we are not having God called upon us. When we travel in his footsteps, go down his streets and his avenues and his highways and his alleyways, then we become identified with God. God's name is, as it were, upon us, and the people see that, and then that arouses a very different reaction from the anti-Semitism that we know. Let us be strong, walk together with Hashem, do our best, and then the good times will roll. Bezrat Hashem.